I've done this before, actually. I met my girlfriend in Yellowstone, and we used to have a no talent show over there, so that's where I cut my teeth. But tonight, branded, I would like to talk about how countries, entire countries, can be branded. Take, for example, Germany. Everyone knows the first thing that comes to mind with Germany. They kind of ruined their brand about 80 years ago. There's Colombia, which brings to mind cocaine, the drug war, coffee. On the other hand, you have France, which has a wonderful brand of cuisine, the city of romance, Paris. And then America, which is represented by the Statue of Liberty and the melting pot, the land that welcomes immigrants from all over the world. I'm going to talk about rebranding later. But recently, a few months ago, my girlfriend and I went to Africa. We went to Ethiopia. And Ethiopia has its own brand, which you may know is famine. And that's not unfair, because I found out that Ethiopia has had, on average, one major famine every 25 years for the past 1,000 years, basically as far back as records go. And the reasons for this are some of the usual suspects, the droughts that they experience periodically. They have swarms of locusts. They are kind of a biblical land, a land of punt, but also a lack of democracy. And that makes sense when you think about dictators, because they don't care about the welfare of their own people. This was borne out with their last emperor, Haile Selassie, who was deposed in 1974 during major famine, where he was shown on television feeding his pet lions steaks, while hundreds of thousands of his own people were dying of starvation. He was deposed, but he was replaced by an equally inept communist regime, and they failed to deal with a famine that hit only 10 years later, and they were overthrown. So that kind of begs the question, why go to Ethiopia? The short answer is it was my girlfriend's idea. But Ethiopia is actually a fascinating country, and we both wanted to see it. They have the Rift Valley, they have game parks, there's the ancient Aksumite Empire, which dates back to Roman times. They have Renaissance castles, and of course the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Lalibela, which are these immense monolithic churches that have been carved out of rock, all underground. And it's just an amazing place. So we were looking forward to seeing all of this. But 2 weeks after we bought our tickets, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia resigned because of massive protests and riots, and a state of emergency was declared. We actually had a friend in Ethiopia at the time, and they said, "Don't come, we're under martial law." And it was also around this time that Donald Trump called all African nations shitholes. Talk about branding. And we had already bought our tickets, so we decided we're going to go anyway. So about a week before we left, something unusual happened. Ethiopia got a new prime minister, and he was an Oromo. The Oromo are one of about 80 different ethnic groups in the country. It's a very diverse country. And the interesting thing about them is that they're the most populous group. They make up about a third of the country, but they have never been represented in high office. And since most of the protesters were Oromo, that seemed to augur well for future stability. So a little, piece of good news before we took off. So we left, we went to Ethiopia, we stayed for about 3 to 4 weeks. So a good amount of time. It's a big country. It's about 4 times the size of Arizona. And there was a lot to see. And one of the first things we noticed was that it was a very Christian country. We found this out on our very first day. because we were woken up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning by a call to prayer, which I thought only happened in Muslim countries, but apparently the Ethiopian Orthodox Church also has the call to prayer. So that was fun. And like I've never, religion has never been like my cup of tea. When I grew up in Southern California, we went to church like everybody else. It was just part of being social. But we never discussed religion at home. No one ever said, what would Jesus do? When a problem came up. But one time my parents were talked into sending me to a summer school, and it was a Catholic summer school, which I still think of as a lost summer, because this was Southern California in the summertime, and they made us wear long pants. And they also gave us homework. But my mom took one look at the homework and she said, don't bother with this. She's like, don't bother memorizing the names of the saints or scripture. This isn't important. It's not like math or science. My mother is French, by the way, so full disclosure. But back to Ethiopia. We spent about a month there, and we saw all the sites I mentioned earlier. It was a wonderful, diverse place. But everywhere we went, we were asked the same question. Like, what do you think of Donald Trump? Everywhere we went. So after offering my apologies, I would ask them what they thought of their new prime minister, which wasn't exactly fair because he'd only been in office for a month. But unlike the trepidation that followed Donald Trump's inauguration, people were full of hope with Abiy Ahmed, their new prime minister. They felt that he was serious about changing the brand of Ethiopia to a country that cared about democratic principles and making his government one that cared about its people. As I said, we spent about a month there, and we experienced a lot of corruption, and that was one of the things that he was supposed to be taking care of. And it was kind of a small-scale corruption. We would try to get on a bus, and we would be quoted one price. They say, oh, it's 100 beer. And a beer is about, it's like 100 beer is about $4. So we'd get on the bus, and then suddenly the price was 200 beer, or 250 beer. Or we would go to a hotel, and we would be like, do you have internet here? And they'll, of course we have internet here. And then we would go in the room, and there would be no internet, no running water, no electricity. And every time we complained about it, we would hear the same thing. People would say, hey, TIA, man. It's like, TIA, this is Africa. And it used to piss me off because it was an excuse to do nothing. And to me, it hurt because it was Africans agreeing with Donald Trump. Hey, TIA, man, what do you expect in a shithole country? And that was in May. And since then, Abiy Ahmed, the president, has released political prisoners. He has lifted restrictions on the internet, the media, newspapers. He ended the 20-year-old civil war between Ethiopia and Eritrea. For the first time in decades, Ethiopian Airlines started flights between the capital of Ethiopia and the capital of Eritrea. And it gave his people hope, and it actually gave me hope too. Because when I came back to my country and I saw people trying to change America's brand with Muslim bans and border walls, and separating immigrant families and caging children, it gave me hope to think about what was happening in Africa. And it gave me hope against all the people who were saying in America, hey, what are you gonna do? TIA, man, this is America.